or 4 weeks, or 5 weeks, or 10 weeks, depending how bad your beekeeping is. And you check and you say, oh, well, I've got 3 mites. The problem is, you should have checked before you started. Because how do you know you didn't have 3 when you started? If you still have 3, you've still not changed the situation. All you've done is kept the loading rate the same. So what has to happen is, at Manuka Health, we were going by the local guidance of check after you treat. But we actually found through monitoring from 15th of August, as soon as you got, no matter where you look at it, Australia, I'm not saying that Australia and New Zealand are much the same from what I've experienced in 1 year. So I'm talking in a very high level here. I haven't got 15 years of experience in Australia, so I might be eating my words in 2 years' time. But basically, you biologically, the maturation rate of bees is you start with 15,000 bees in a colony in August, you're going up to 60,000, 45 to 60,000 in December, and back to 15,000 in June the following year. And basically, the mites are breeding at the same rate through the early part of the year as brood starts to generate. The more brood, the more mites. If you don't treat, you're going to have major problems. So let's just look at this. You go up with the bees, you come down, that's the year. Mites are going like this. But the problem with the mites is the mites are not dying like the bees are dying. So you get to December, January, February, and your bee population is going down because naturally it has to go down. It's biologically driven to go down. But the mites, every bee that dies, the number of mites in the hive increases proportionately to the number of bees. If you think about it, the mites keep going up. They're not dying because they can live 4 months, 5 months on bees. But the bee populations are going down. So you get this disparity. And that's where it's critically important to know what your loading rate is before you treat. Because if your loading rate is 60 before you treat and you come back and it's 15, great. You've actually seen a result. Come back in 3 weeks later and it's down to 2. Great, you've now reduced the loading rate. That's what's important about loading rate. So the only way to get loading rate, or mites per bees, is Varroa shake with sugar shakes. Everybody's infatuated with alcohol shakes. So I'm anti-alcohol shakes. Why? We're not here to kill bees, we're here to kill mites. Let's use sugar shakes, because you can do hundreds of them without killing the bees. When you've got 15,000 bees in winter and you want to do lots of shakes, alcohol shakes, you kill lots and lots of bees. We took away, we've been doing sampling now for the government requirements, we're taking away 5-litre buckets of dead bees. It seems illogical when we can do sugar shakes and get the same outcome. Yes, you'll say 70% accuracy, but I would rather do a sugar shake on every beehive than do 10% alcohol shakes. So we were doing this in New Zealand, is doing sugar shakes. We would mark with tape on each site 3 beehives, 1 on each end of the site and 1 in the middle. And you would write VC and the number of mites that come out at that shake. So every time you come to the site, in New Zealand with mites, I can tell you now in Australia, guys, if mites become endemic, the way we currently work in Australia will be gone. You'll be in your brood chamber every 21 days. If you're not in the brood chamber, you won't manage mites. Guaranteed, hands down, because if you don't check your brood, you don't know if you have mites. You can say, oh, I've got great populations. I've talked to thousands. I went and bought a business, 4,000 beehives. The guy said, oh, the bees are great, everything's working. Go and audit them. Come back to him and said, when was the time you treated? Oh, we were late this year, we put our treatments in May. I said, when is the last time you personally looked at your bees? Because he's got staff, 8 or 9. So I haven't been out for a couple months, and everything's 2 boxes of bees. I said, no, it's not. I said, I've audited 500 of the 4,000 you want to sell, and I don't believe we'll get 2,000 hives when we finished. We finished and accumulated those beehives. There were 1,700 left of 4,000 colonies. You have to check for mites. You have to shake, 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 shake. I'll repeat it, you have to shake, 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 shake. And you need to be, the other thing is AFB, guys. What happens with mites is impacts health, impacts queens. AFB outbreak will go significantly up. So you have to be checking your brood to manage the AFB levels. Now, New Zealand has an exceptionally good management platform for AFB. 1 million hives, less than 0.3% AFB reported, because they don't allow treatments for AFB. Oxytec, that's the worst decision the Australian industry have made, to treat with Oxytec, because all you're doing is you're masking the presence of AFB. Now, I'm not saying people are doing it broadly. I'm nervous that they are, but that will change if mites become apparent in New Zealand. In Australia, you will have to check for AFB every time you are on site. You won't be harvesting without AFBing. You are doing an AFB check two or three frames. You won't be going to site, and the only time you'll be basically not going through the brood chamber when mites, or if they're endemic in Australia, is if you're putting on extra honey boxes. So you know you've prepared your bees, they're all level, and you're just arriving to put honey boxes on. You don't have to go and check because you've already checked them, you know. But other than that, it will be very, very challenging. It'll be for especially because you've got to deal with the heat in New Zealand. We don't have the temperatures you have in Australia in the summer. I've been AFBing beehives in the Mallee in Mildura this year at 43 degrees, and man, I was about dead after doing that for a couple months. So that's it. Before I carry on, so we're happy there. We've talked about what mites are. They actually eat the bee's fat. If you don't see mites, you still have mites. Sugar shakes. August to February, you're going to be shaking non-stop every time you can. Do 3 beehives per site. I really feel load sizes will decrease in Australia. Having 144 beehives, which is a standard truck size, will become a thing of the past because the robbing will be so intense, and robbing is one of the major vectors for mite spread, so that will change. Calendar treatments. So everybody talks about it, Michelle talked about it, this calendar, how you treat. The reality at scale, whether you're 400 hives, 500 hives, 1,000, 30,000, you have to be monitoring to know when to treat. If your loading rate is higher than 3 mites per 100 bees, you have to treat. So in New Zealand, when I started in New Zealand in 2013, we could treat twice, no problem. Before I left Manuka Health, we were treating 4 times a year at scale. So that's 2 synthetic treatments and oxalics treatments in between that all the time. So I don't believe there's a calendar treatment specific to how you operate to say, okay, well, I can only treat in September and I treat in April. I think you've got to be on top of your bees and know what's happening. And if you check 3 beehives on site every time, and you have mites in those 3 beehives, you have mites in every beehive. You've got to think about it that way, because the reality is mites, as soon as, if this colony dies and it gets robbed out, all the mites that are in it still are alive, they move to the next colony. And you just keep passing it on and on and on, colony to colony to colony. So what I always say to everybody is, if you've got mites in one beehive, you've got them in every beehive. Something to remember. Let's brood all year round. That's an issue. I think what will happen in Australia is you'll probably be having a lot of people push into the centre of Australia, into dry mallee country, to get brood breaks, because if you can stop them laying brood, you can put in treatments that will almost obliterate the mites. No brood, no mites, because the mites have to breed in the brood. So if you can effectively make a brood break, you can stop the mite life cycle. So that's why I put that in there. Government treatment and legislation, regulations. Man, if Australia's federal government are behind on the 8 ball on legislating what miticide treatments we can use, we'll be in serious trouble. Like, I mean serious trouble. Because I've been trying to purchase Apivar treatments, which is amitrez. You can get tactic for anybody who's a farmer. You can use tactic. In the States, you can use tactic treatment. Please don't start doing that because it's uncontrolled the amount you can use, and that's what the States have done. They use tactic, the cattle treatment, in the powder format. But the problem is if you don't treat at the right levels, you create resistance. So you treat too much, mites become, you obliterate the mites. You always got the top 1% that remains, they become resistant, and that 1% breeds on the next life cycle of mites. If you undertreat with tactic, it's even worse, because then you leave 20 or 30% that live, and they become resistant. And amitrez is guaranteed your most effective treatment against mites. Amitrez makes the mite paralyzed, and the mite falls down off the bees. And what will happen is, guys, if mites become endemic in Australia, every beehive will become on mesh bases, because mites fall off, the mites fall down and fall through the mesh bases. So that's critical. Open feeding will be gone. You can no longer open feed, because that's just the #1 spread for mites. So pollen paddies, supplements will all be fed internally. Every hive in New Zealand will have top feeders if mites become, in Australia, every hive will have a top feeder. You can't open feed. And the stress that open feeding brings on the bees when you have mites. Imagine if you're having mites, the best way to describe it is having a stomach bug all the time, because it's actually eating its stomach. That's how I explain it. So you don't want to be, bees are continually sick.